Inner circulation. At every moment a person on the earth comes under one or other of the 48 orders of laws, or influences if you prefer, that play upon this planet owing to its position in the ray of creation. The influences come from higher, middle and lower parts of the descending octave of the ray in which our earth appears. These 48 orders of laws from different levels in the scale of things govern the earth, and all other planets similar to this earth, in the myriads of solar systems of the Milky Way to which our solar system belongs. Recollect also that there are untold numbers of Milky Ways or galaxies in the universe, so we are therefore very small and practically insignificant. If our Earth were shattered by a comet, it would be of no consequence to the total sway of all the vastness of created things in the known universe. Shattered planets in our minute solar system exist, which revolve around the Sun as smaller bodies within the Kuiper belt, planets only a few miles in diameter, asteroids and boulders, tens of thousands of them. This is looking at the visible, physical side of things known to science and concerning the external universe, which is either marvelous and illuminating, or weakening to feelings of self-worth and our inflated sense of central importance. When we however look at the whole matter according to esoteric psychology, the picture becomes transformed. The work teaches that a human being is not simply a function of the world we are born into, or a slave to it for that matter. The apparatus of the universe is, as far as our ray of creation is concerned, for the purpose of evolution. It is a vast distilling mechanism, to extract the finer from the coarser, which is what modern literature refers to as alchemy. There is an old adage wonderfully described, in the teachings of Mani. What is individual evolution in the esoteric sense? Seeing through long inner work, and then choosing the finer. Eventually willing and then ultimately living the finer. Recall the ancient Smaragdine tablet of Hermes which begins by saying one must separate the finer from the coarser. Thus begins personal work, and it takes a long time before it begins. So what then is meant in these analogies by finer? If one experiences a moment of fuller understanding, of insight or of outer perception by means of hydrogen-24, then it will be finer than anything that can be achieved through the intelligence due to hydrogen-48. We see hundreds of connections that we've never seen before. In exactly the same sense, a cooked potato is finer than a raw potato. It is a higher hydrogen and thus becomes food for man, so can enter into us. Instead of being eaten by livestock, it can now be eaten by man. Domesticated livestock obviously cannot cook potatoes. The intelligence of man is necessary to make fire, to make a vessel holding water and so on. A raw potato is classed in the table of hydrogens as belonging to the order of hydrogens designated by the number 1536. This hydrogen comes low down in the scale of being derived from the ray of creation. A cooked potato, however, is capable of a different destiny, just as we ourselves are as beings, if only we shift our level of being, even just a fraction. The being of a cooked potato attracts a different life from the being of a raw potato. How does it ascend in the scale of being? By means of something acting upon it, something higher. The whole business of cooking things is the action of something higher acting upon something lower. However, notice here too that the result does not reach the level of what is acting upon it. The intelligence of man applied in the form of heat, water, cooking vessels, and so on, to the raw potato does not mean that the result, the cooked potato, now knows how to cook other potatoes. A higher force acting on a lower force, or a higher matter acting on a lower matter, brings the lower up to a stage beyond what it was, but not up to the level of the acting force. This idea is represented in the work in terms of the three forces. An active force acting upon a passive force produces an intermediate force. When food is taken into the body, it enters, according to the teaching of the work, as material conducting a passive force. It is then acted upon by an active force, present within the body, and the result is an intermediate or neutral force. Hence 768 is acted upon by 192 and the result is 384, which is intermediate. Any matter-conducting passive force is transformed into a higher state by means of the material-conducting active force, provided there is an intermediate possibility. However, the higher matter into which it is transformed is neither one nor the other, but a third thing, intermediate and lying between them, conducting neutralizing force. As long as it remains within the sphere of influence of the forces that gave it origin. This can be illustrated as shown in the diagram shared. Or if we arrange these figures in ascending order of fineness, a spiral emerges. If 192 is not present, then 768 cannot reach its next stage of evolution into 384. Nor can 192, by acting upon 768, expect to get anything equal to itself. It can only create something in between itself and what it is acting upon. So the higher acting upon the lower can only transform the lower to a stage beyond what it was, but not up to the level of the higher. And the lower cannot reach its next stage, save by the influence of something higher than both levels of being. This idea is deep and explains not only many things in life, but many special compounds, as in the chemistry of our body. It also explains, in one sense only, what esotericism is. Esoteric ideas, the fire and light behind them which an individual can feel when they apply real valuation, can be regarded, but only in this connection, as active force. Acting on us, taking man as a hydrogen whose center of gravity lies in 48, these influences, coming from a higher point in the sun octave, can transform or cook an individual up to the level of 24, which is all planets, a central system possessing global conscious awareness. However, esoteric ideas are first to be taken as 12, the level of a sun, which is higher than the product or result, all worlds. A star is obviously of a higher level or finer substance than that of all planets circulating within its central system. If you prefer, when carbon-12 acts on incoming life taken as C48, the outcome can give rise to C24. Taking the right side of the Enneagram, which is marked with the numbers 384, 192 and 96 in progressive series on the periphery. Many other things can be arranged around the circumference apart from the hydrogens, but it will be easiest here to discuss the reverse movement in terms of hydrogens. Notice that in its inner vectors, 384 is connected with 96, and then after with 192. Something goes forward, and then back, in a reverse movement. The inner line between 384 and 96 indicates some action, some connection between these 2 points as a first movement. Another vector then goes to the station 192 as a second direction. The order of these inner connections is different from the order of the outer series on the circumference, namely 384, 192 and 96. Put differently, the inner circulation of the Enneagram takes a different form from the outer. We think naturally that 384 should become 192 and then 96 in a regular manner. However, internally, behind outer appearances, another system is at work, which is very strange if you reflect upon it. We are observing here the mystery of life within the inner circulation of the Enneagram. Whereas looking at the outer series of numbers, one observes what corresponds to that powerful but erroneous form of thinking called thinking from appearances, from our 5 senses. Notice too that the higher must exist before the lower can undergo transformation. This is easiest to grasp once the ray of creation, in its naked meaning, is emotionally perceived, then personally acknowledged. It has to be felt to be believed. For in it the higher forms the lower, so that if the lower seeks transformation, the higher is there awaiting it. This is one reason why it is a good thing to ponder the ray of creation often in our inner reflections. The ray is a series of transformations, of the finer into the coarser, from the highest to the lowest. What is the Enneagram about then? The Enneagram depicts a series of transformations from lower to higher, from coarser to finer. In order that a lower may become transformed into a higher, it must first become passive. It must allow itself to be acted upon by a higher influence. How else could lower become higher? How else could the food we eat become cooked and then recooked, transformed and then retransformed into higher and higher substances, unless it submitted to the 6 stages of digestion? Digestion is transformation, work is transformation, and if the higher influences of this work are to act upon an individual, then they must in one sense become passive, and permit these forces to act. They need to acquiesce. We must realize that we alone cannot do anything, realize also that greater mind exists, as otherwise we would be in confusion. If we do not admit that anything bigger than what we are exists, or if in some way we think we create who we are, what we become and that we are self-made, then we cannot be acted upon and so cannot evolve, and we will therefore degrade over time and gradually backslide into something lower, becoming trousered apes. However, if we become passive and therefore capable of hearing, then of accepting, we must not expect to get beyond our own next stage. To begin with, we cannot equal the work, and it would be a mistake to think so. We cannot equal the forces that are transforming us. If we reflect upon this deeply enough, then it should be possible to see that there always needs to be something higher than any being, whatever their stage of ascendancy. If evolution is to become possible, there must be a highest that is unattainable, and we cannot eventually become creators, at least not in the sense of universal conscious awareness. We possess free will, we are at liberty to make choices, but we do not create anything, we simply choose the path we desire to follow, which is how our fate is determined, as the outcome to those actions.